Hello, BookTube. Here's the second part of Chapter 3, Old Catalogues and New Prices. But we are neglecting the Quaritch Catalogue. Let us open it at random, as old people do to open their Bibles and govern their conduct by the first text which meet their eyes. Here we are. Grammatica Graecia, Milan, 1476. The first edition of this first book printed in Greek, one of 6 known copies, so it is possible for only 6 busy people to recreate themselves after a hard day's work with the first Greek grammar. Too bad. Here's another, Macrobius the Saturnalia, a miscellany of criticism and antiquities full of erudition and very useful, similar in their plan to the Noctus Actica of Aelius Gallius. No doubt, but as dead as counterfeit money. Here's another, Boethius, De Consulae Philosophy. Boethius? I seem to have heard of him. Who was he? Not in Who's Who, obviously. Let us look elsewhere. Famous philosopher and official in the court of Theodoric, born about 475 AD, put to death without trial by about 524. They had a short way with philosophers in those days. If William II to none in Germany had adopted this method with his philosophers, the world might not now be in such a plight. Note, a college professor to whom I was in confidence showing these notes the other day remarked, "I suggest you soft pedal that Boethius business, my boy." How we middle-aged men love to call each other boys, very much as young boys flatter themselves with the phrase old man. The Consolation of Philosophy was the best seller for 1,000 years or so. Boethius's reputation is not in the making as yours is, and when yours is made, it will in all probability not last as long. I thought I detect a slight note of sarcasm in this, but I may have been mistaken. And let us look further. Here we are, Quaritch's Credulities. Hastily gobbed by in 5 months trials. Tom Corret was a buffoon and a beggar and a braggart, and wrote what has come to be regarded as the first handbook on travel. Browning thought very highly of it, as I remember, and Walter Hill is at this very moment offering his copy of the Credulities for $500. The catalogues say there are very few perfect copies in existence, in which case I should like to content myself with Browning's imperfect copy. I love these old books written by frail human beings for human beings frail as myself. Clowns are the true philosophers, and all vagabonds are beloved, most of all Locke's. Don't confuse my Locke with the fellow who wrote on the human understanding a century or two ago. Here is The Ship of Fools, another bestseller of a bygone age. The original work by Sebastian Brandt was published not long after the invention of printing in 1494. Edition followed edition, not only in its original Swabian dialect, but also in Latin, French, and Dutch. In 1509, an English version, it could hardly be called a translation, by Alexander Barclay appeared from the press of Pinson, who called Caxton worshipful master. For quite 200 years it was the rage of the reading world. In it, the vices and weaknesses of all classes of society were satirized in a manner which gave great delight, and those who could not read were able to enjoy the fine, bold woodcuts with which the work was embellished. No form of folly escaped. Even the medieval book collector is made to say, "Still am I busy books assemblage, for I have plenty, it is pleasant thine, in my conceit, and to have them I in hand, but what they mean do I not understand." This is one of the books which can usually be found in the Quaritch Catalogue, if it can be found anywhere. At the wholesale, a copy brought $1,825, but the average collector will make shift to get along with the excellent reprint which was published in Edinburgh 40 years ago or so, and which can be had for a few shillings when he chances to come across it. Here is a great book, the first folio Shakespeare, the cornerstone of every great library. What's in a name? Did Shakespeare of Stratford write the plays? The late Dr. Furness declined to be led into discussion of this point, while wisely remarking, "We have the plays. What difference does it make who wrote them?" But the question will not down. But the question will not down. The latest theory is that Bacon wrote the Psalms of David also, and to disguise the fact, tucked in a cryptogram, another name. If you have at hand a King James version of the Bible, and will turn to the 46th Psalm and count the words from the beginning to the 46th word, and then you count the words from the end again until you get to the 46th word, you may learn something to your advantage. But whoever wrote them, the first folio of the plays collected by Hemming and Condell and printed in 1623 at the charges of Isaac Eigard and Ed Blount, is one of the greatest, if not the greatest, volume in all literature. In it, not less than 20 dramas, many of which rank among the literary masterpieces of the world, were brought together for the first time. Is it any wonder, therefore, that the first folio of Shakespeare, not our poet, but the world's, is so highly regarded? The condition and location of practically every copy in the world is known and recorded. Originally, the price is supposed to have been a guinea, and a century passed before collectors and scholars realized that it, like its author, was not for the age, but for all time. In 1792, a copy brought £30, and in 1818, an original copy in a genuine state changed hands for £121. But what shall be said of the price it fetches today? When a few years ago in Philadelphia, a collector paid the record price of almost $20,000, people unlearned in the lore of books expressed amazement that a book should bring so large a sum. But he secured one of the finest copies in existence, known to collectors as the Locker Lampson copy, which had been for a short time in the possession of William C. Van Antwerp of New York, who, unluckily for himself and for the book collecting world, stopped collecting almost as soon as he began. The splendid folio has now found a permanent resting place in the Widener Memorial Library at Harvard. It is no doubt inevitable that these notable books should at last come to occupy honored niches and great mausoleums like public libraries, as public libraries really are. But I cannot escape the conviction that Edmond de Goncourt was right when he said in his will, "My wish is that my drawings, my prints, my curiosity, my books, in a word, these things of art which have been the joy of my life, shall not be consigned to the cold tomb of a museum and subject to the stupid glance of the careless passer-by, but I require that they shall be dispersed under the hammer of an auctioneer, so that the pleasure which the acquiring of each one of them has given me shall be given again, in each case, to some inheritor of my own tastes. I wish that my friends, the Pennells, who had followed this course when they gave up their London apartments in the Adelphi and disposed of their valuable Whistler collection. But no, with characteristic generosity, and the whole collection goes to the nation as a gift. The Library of Congress at Washington is to be its resting place. The demand for Whistler is ever increasing with its fame, which the Pennells say will live forever. Those who have a lot of Whistler material smile. The value of their collections is enhanced. Those of who, like the writer, have to be content with 2 butterflies, or at most 3, sigh and turn aside. Possession is the grave of bliss. No sooner do we own some great book than we want another. The appetite grows, but what it feeds on. The Shakespeare folio is a book for show and to be proud of, but we want a book to love. Here is Walton's Complete Angler, beloved by gentlemen such as all collectors are. We welcome the peace and contentment which it suggests, especially, as the author says, in such days and times as I have laid aside business and gone a-fishing. Therein lies the charm of this book, for those of us who are wise enough occasionally to lay aside business and go a-fishing or a-hunting, albeit only book hunting, for it is the spirit of sport rather than the sport itself that is important. Old Isaac Walton counted fishermen as honest men. I wondered, did he call them truthful? If so, there has been a sad falling off since the day for his day, for I seem to remember words to this effect. The fisherman riseth up early in the morning and disturbeth the whole household. Mighty are the preparations. He goeth forth full of hope, that when the day is far spent, he returneth smelling of strong drink, and the truth is not in him. I wish that some day I might discover an angler not on the banks of a stream, but all unsuspected on some bookstall. It is most unlikely these days are past. It is most unlikely those days are past. I shall never own a first angler. This little book has been thumbed out of existence almost by generations of readers with coarse, wet hands who carried the book in their pockets or left it lying by the river in an excitement of landing a trout. 5 impressions, all rare, were made before the author died in his 90th year and was buried in the south transept of the Cathedral of William of Wykeham. But Walton wrote of fishers of men as well as fishing. He lives of his lives of John Donne, the Dean of St. Paul's, Richard Hooker, the judicious, as he is usually called when called at all, of George Herbert and several other men, honorable in their generation, are quaint and charming. These lives, published originally in the intervals of many years, are not rare, nor is the volume of 1670 the first collected edition of such lives, unless it is a presentation copy. Such a copy sold 20 years ago for £15. Some years ago I paid almost 3 times this sum for a copy inscribed by Walton to the Lord Bishop of Oxford. I did not then know that the Bishop of Oxford was also the famous Dr. John Fell, the hero of the well-known epigram, "I do not like you, Dr. Fell. The reason why I cannot tell. But this I know, and know full well, I do not like you, Dr. Fell, or I would willingly have paid more for it." But I am wandering from the text. The return to the angler. £50 was a fair price for a fine copy 50 years ago. George D. Smith sold a copy a few weeks since for $5,000, and the Heckscher copy a few years ago brought $3,900, but the record price appears to have been paid for the Van Antwerp copy, which is generally believed to be the finest in existence. It is bound in original sheepskin and was formerly in the library of Frederick Locker Lampson. It was sold in London some 10 years ago and was purchased by Quaritch for an American, which was the short of non de guerre of the late J.P. Morgan for $1,290. When anglers could be had for £50, Vickers brought 10 for 15 or 15 if it in exceptionally fine condition, and the man who then spent his sum for the vicar chose as widely as did the vicar's wife her wedding gown, not for the fine glossy service, but for qualities as would wear well. These 2 little volumes, with the Salisbury imprint and a required blunder or 2, will soon be worth $1,000. When I paid $120 for mine some years ago, I felt that I was courting ruin, especially when I recalled that Dr. Johnson thought rather well of himself for having secured for Goldsmith just half this sum of the copyright for it. Boswell's story of the sale of the manuscript of the Vicar of Wakefield, as Johnson related it to him, is as pretty a bit of bibliographical history as we have. Those who know it well will pardon the intrusion of the story for the sake of the pleasure it may give others. I received, said Johnson, one morning a message from poor Goldsmith that he was in great distress, and as it was not in his power to come to me, begged that I would come to him as soon as possible. I sent him a guinea and promised to come to him directly. I accordingly went as soon as I was dressed, and found that his landlady had arrested him for his rent, at which he was in a violent passion. I perceived that he had already changed my guinea, and had got a bottle of Madeira and a glass before him. I put the cork into the bottle, desired he would be calm, and began to talk to him of the means by which he might be extricated. He then told me that he had a novel ready for the press, which he produced to me. I looked into it and saw its merit, told the landlady I should soon return, and having gone to a bookseller, sold it for £60. I brought Goldsmith the money, and he discharged his rent, not without rating his landlady in a high tone for having used him so ill. And, sir, continued Johnson, it was a sufficient voice, too, when it was sold, for then the fame of Goldsmith had not been elevated as it afterwards was by his traveller, and the bookseller had such fine hopes for profit by his bargain that he kept the manuscript by him a long time and did not publish it till after the traveller had appeared. Then, to be sure, it was accidentally worth more money. Excuse me. Here we have a characteristic sketch of the two men, an excitable, amiable, and improvident Goldie, and the wise and kindly Johnson, instantly corking the bottle and getting down to brass tacks, as we should say. The first edition of Robinson Crusoe is another favorite book with collectors, as why should it not be? Here is a copy in 2 volumes. There should be 3, in red morocco, super extra, gilt edges, by Bedford. It should be in contemporary calf, but the price was only £46. Turning to a bookseller's catalogue published a year or 2 ago, there is a copy, 3 volumes, 8vo, with a map and 2 plates in original calf binding, and the price is $2,500. A note in one of Stan Henkel's recently auctioned catalogues, and there are none better, clears up a point which has always troubled me, and which I will quote at length for the benefit of other collectors who may not have seen it. The supposed points signifying the first issues of this famous book are stumbling blocks to all bibliographers. Professor W.P. Trent of Columbia University, undoubtedly the foremost authority on Defoe, after extended research and the comparison of many copies, states that he is of the opinion that any purchaser entering Taylor's shop at the sign of the Ship in Paternoster Row on April 25th, 1719, usually taken as the date of issue, might have been handed a copy falling under any of the following categories, with apply, that's spelled A-P-P-L-Y, in the preface, and pilot, P-I-L-O-T, on page 343, line 2. Or apply, A-P-P-L-Y, in the preface, and pilot, P-I-L-A-T-E, on page 343. Or a copy with apply, A-P-Y-L-Y, in the preface, and pilot, P-I-L-A-T-E, on page 343. Or even yet, apply, A-P-Y-L-Y, in the preface, and pilot, P-I-L-O-T, on page 343. It is unquestionably wrong, in this opinion, to call any of these first issue. Professor Trent sees no reason to believe that there was a reissue with A-P-Y-L-Y corrected in the preface, but these mistakes were quite probably corrected while the sheets were passing through the press, and it depends on how the sheets were collated by the binder, what category of the 4 given any special copy belongs to. This is a great relief to me, as my copy, which was once Congreve's, while leaving nothing to be desired in the matter of condition, binding, and plates, has the word apply, A-P-P-L-Y, in the preface, and pilot, P-I-L-O-T, on page 343. But it is perfectly clear, having in mind the spacing of the types, and the longer word has given way to the shorter. There is, however, another edition of Robinson Crusoe, which for rarity puts all first editions in the shade. So immediate was the success of this wonderful romance that it was issued in a newspaper, very much as popular novels are now run. It was published in the original London Post, or Heathcote's Intelligence, numbers from 125 to 289, October 7th, 1719, to October 19th, 1720. This was publication in parts with a vengeance. Of the entire series of 164 leaves, 65 leaves, sorry, with of the entire series of 165 leaves, only one is a facsimile. I see that I have not yet said that I own this copy. There is a copy in the British Museum, but I am told that this is very imperfect, and I know of no other. I was a few evenings ago looking over Arnold's first report of a book collector. I had just given an old time year's salary for a manuscript poem by Keats, and I was utterly bewildered by reading this, only a few months after I began collecting more than 100 pages of original manuscripts of Keats that there were just then offered for sale came to my way and were secured at 1/5 of their value. Of if the price I paid for one page is any criterion as to the value of the 100 pages, Mr. Arnold is by now a very rich man, and elsewhere in his report he gives a list of books sold by Sotheby's in 1896 at prices which makes one's mouth water. For example, Chapman's Homer, 1616, £15. Chaucer's Works, 1542, £15, 10 shillings. Robinson Crusoe, 1719 to 1720 for £75. Goldsmith's Vicar, 1766, £65. Goldsmith's Deserted Village, 1770, £25. Herrick's Hesperides, 1648 for £38. Milton's Paradise Lost, 1667, £90. But why continue? The point of if it is at all, the point of it all is his comment of the beginner. If the beginner is alarmed by those prices, let him remember that each are paid only for well-known, highly prized rarities. And remember, too, that this is the comment of an astute collector upon the prices of only 20 years ago. It is, however, only proper to bear in mind when referring to the English auction prices that the knockout may have been and probably was in operation. This time-honored and beneficent custom results in enriching the London book dealer at the expense of the owner or the estate of whose books are being sold. The existence of the knockout is pretty generally admitted by the London dealers, but they usually couple the admission with the statement that no reputable dealer will have anything to do with its operations. It is always the other fellow who is in the ring. Reduced to its simplest terms, a knockout consists of a clique of men who agree that certain books, or anything else, shall be bought at auction without competition. One book or class of books shall be bought by one book or class of books shall be bought by A, B will buy another, C another, and so on. At some convenient time or place after the books have been delivered, a second auction is held and they are again put up. This time there is real competition, but the profits go into a pool which is equally divided among the members. This custom has taken such a strong hold on the trade that it seems impossible to break it up. Should a person bid at the sale at which the scheme is intended to operate, he would get either nothing or books at such a price as would cause him to remember the sale is out of the sale to his dying day. There is nothing analogous to it in this country, and it was to escape from the operations that it was decided to sell the Great Whole Collection at Anderson in New York City a few years ago. Most of the books then sold realized the highest prices ever known. Many of the London dealers were represented. Quaritch, Maggs, and several others came in person, and the sale would long be remembered in the annals of the trade. After the above explanation, it is hardly necessary to say Book of Auction Records, published by Carslake in London, has no value whatever as a guide to prices in comparison with American book prices current, to the compilation of which the late Luther S. Livingston devoted so much of his time which we now know should have been spent in doing original work in bibliography. Returning for a moment to Mr. Arnold and his contribution to bibliography, he did the booksellers a good turn and helped collectors justify their extravagance to their wives by publishing some years ago a record of books and letters. Mr. Arnold devoted the leisure of his 6 years to forming a collection of books with perseverance and intelligence. Then he suddenly stopped and turned over to Bangs and Company, the auctioneers, the greater part of his collection, and awaited the result with interest. I say with interest, advisedly, for the result fully justifies his judgment. In his record, he gives the date of acquisition, together with the cost of each item in one column, and another the selling price. He also states whether the item was bought by of a bookseller or a collector or at auction. He had spent a trifle over $10,000, and his profit almost exactly equaled his outlay. I say his profit, but I have used the wrong word. His profit was the pleasure he received in discovering, buying, and owning the treasures which for a time were in his possession. The difference in actual money between what he paid and what he received, some $10,000, was the reward for his industry and courage in paying what doubtless many people suppose to be extravagant prices for his books. Let us examine one only. It is certainly not a fair example, but it happens to interest me. He had a copy of Keats's poems, 1817. Excuse me. He had a copy of Keats's poems, 1817, with an inscription in the poet's handwriting. My dear Giovanni, I hope your eyes will soon be well enough to read this with pleasure and ease. There were some other inscriptions in Keats's hand, and for this treasure Arnold paid a bookseller in 1895 $71 in the auction, at the auction in 1901 it brought $500, and it subsequently passed into the Van Antwerp collection, finally going back to London, where it was sold in 1907 for £90, being bought by Quaritch. Finally, it passed into the possession of the late W. H. Hagen, and at the sale of his library in May 1918, was knocked down to GDS for $1,950. From him, I tried to secure it, but was too late. My copy of the poems has, alas, no inscription, but it cost me in excess of $500, and a well-known collector has just paid Rosenbach $9,000 for Keats's 3 slender volumes, each with inscriptions in the poet's hand. 3 into 9 is a simple problem. Even I can do it, but the volume of poems is much rarer than in Endymion or Lamia. So there we end chapter 3 of the amenities of book collecting, but the chapter is entitled Old Catalogues, New Prices. And in a couple days, we will be back with chapter 4. Have a good evening, BookTube.